By the time you hear this, I'm mostly back to myself. That's the problem, really. Memory doesn't come back in a straight line. It comes like rain in Wyoming, sideways, in sheets, in cold little needles that sting when they hit skin. You asked me what happened out there, why I'm not the same guy you used to lift with, why I jump at stupid noises and refuse to go camping. So I'm going to tell you, but I'm warning you up front. If you ever thought about going off alone into the Wyoming backcountry in autumn, don't. Name's Caleb Winchester, born and raised in San Francisco. Somehow ended up a lumberjack instead of sitting in a tech office like every guidance counselor predicted. I like real weights, trees, chainsaws, barbells. My one real hobby outside of work used to be the gym, deadlifts, squats, beating the hell out of myself after long days in the woods. It kept me sane. Last time I was normal, really normal, was 3 years ago. We just finished a contract up in Northern California. Long months, good money, garbage sleep. I'd been talking about taking a solo trip for a while. No coworkers, no noise, no bar fights. Just me, a tent, a stove, and silence. I picked Wyoming because I was sick of crowded trails and influencer hikers with tiny dogs and massive ring lights. The Bridger-Tatum area sounded perfect. Big stretches of forest, unpredictable weather, lots of empty space. Autumn there is already past the tourist season. Fewer people, more room, exactly what I thought I wanted. I booked the flight, rented a beat-up old 4x4 in Jackson, got a vague nudge from a ranger towards some lesser-used trails, and drove until the road turned to gravel and then to ruts. It was late September. The forecast said light rain, chances increasing. Yeah, understatement of the century. I hiked in about 8 miles that first day. Pack around 30 kilos, tent, food, stove, axe, fixed blade knife, a cheap pump-action shotgun I rented from a local shop for bears. I knew the basics: bill out, carry spray, don't store food in your tent unless you want teeth where your ribs should be. It started drizzling around noon. By the time I reached a flat clearing near a tree line and a narrow creek, the drizzle had turned to solid, cold rain. Wyoming rain doesn't fall straight down. It rides the wind, gets under your hood, down your neck, under your clothes. The ground was half mud, half dead leaves, all of it ready to suck your boots off if you weren't careful. Perfect place to camp, I thought. I set the tent just inside the tree line for a bit of windbreak, hung my foot in a bear bag high up between two pines, and got a small fire going in a makeshift rock ring. I remember feeling calm, happy even, far from engines and generators, just the sound of rain and the creek. The first weird thing was the silence. Forests have noise, even when it's quiet. There's something: birds, insects, wind in the canopy, little animals rattling around like they own the place. But by the time the light started going, I realized I wasn't hearing much of anything. No birds, no insects, just rain and the occasional groan of trees shifting in the wind. It was the kind of silence that doesn't feel empty. It feels occupied, like something is listening harder than you are. I told myself it was the weather. Bad conditions shut animals down. That's normal, right? Right. Then I found the tree. It was about 40 yards from camp, just as the foggy dark started crowding in. A thick conifer 4 feet across at the base, bark dark with wet, and about 10 feet up, the trunk had been twisted, not broken, twisted. Like a massive hand had just grabbed it and torqued the top half at an angle. Splinters and ragged bark stuck out in a spiral. I've seen wind damage. I've seen lightning strikes. I've seen trees shattered by falling rock. I've never seen a tree taken by the throat and wrung like that. You know me. I'm not a superstitious guy. I work with chainsaws and wood chippers, not crystals and tarot cards. But something about that tree made me take a step back without thinking about it. My brain did that little dance, storm damage, maybe old injury, whatever. But my gut said, you're not the biggest thing here anymore. I went back to camp, fed the fire, kept the shotgun leaned against a log within arm's reach, and tried to convince myself I was being dramatic. The forest proved me wrong around midnight. I don't really sleep heavy when I'm camping. I dozed, woke, listened to the rain, dozed again. At some point, the rain eased off and that's when I heard it. Knock. A single solid impact somewhere out in the dark, like a bat against a tree trunk. Then another. Knock, knock, knock. Evenly spaced, deliberate, not random creaking of branches falling. I thought, ranger? Another camper? But no one hikes out there in that kind of weather without a reason, and there hadn't been another vehicle at the trailhead. And anyway, that sound was too heavy, like someone was swinging a fence post against a telephone pole. The knocks stopped and for about 10 minutes there was nothing but my own heartbeat banging in my ears. Then a whoop carried through the trees. It started low and rose up, strange and hollow, echoing in the wet air. Not a coyote, not any owl I've ever heard, not an elk bugle. It sounded almost human, trying to imitate something else. Followed by another knock, then another whoop further away. I lay there in my sleeping bag, every muscle locked, listening as something large moved just beyond the circle of firelight. You know that soft thud heavy footsteps make on damp ground? That's what I heard. Slow, careful, almost testing. The smell hit next. I work around sweat and chainsaw exhaust and rotting wood all the time. I can handle bad smells. This was different. Musky, rotten, like wet dog mixed with decomposition and moldy earth. It seeped into the tent, under the zipper, into my nose and throat. Something brushed against the nylon, just the lightest drag, like fingers testing a curtain. I grabbed the shotgun, thumped the safety off, and tried to breathe without sounding like I was hyperventilating. My heart was pounding so hard, I was sure whatever was out could hear it. The steps moved around the tent, slow, deliberate. A low, chesty huff came from just outside my head. You know, when a big dog snorts at you, close enough the air hits your skin, multiply that by 10. I didn't move, didn't breathe, didn't even blink. The fire crackled weakly outside. Rain pattered softly on the fly. The smell thickened, then thinned as the footsteps moved away. Another knock sounded, further out. Then, after a while, a second whoop, deep and weirdly garbled, echoed back. It took me an hour to unclench my fingers from the shotgun. I told myself it was an elk, a bear, a moose, something normal. I didn't believe myself. Morning came gray with a thin sheet of drizzle. My head felt stuffed with cotton. I forced down some oatmeal, shoved my feet into wet boots, and went to check the area around camp. I found the tracks almost immediately. They weren't clear at first, just scuffed patches where leaves had been pushed aside. The soil underneath dark and compacted. I followed them away from camp into a slightly open area where the ground was more exposed. And there they were, footprints, humanoid, 5 toes, no claws, deep heel, wide forefoot. Each one was around 18 inches long. 18. That's almost as long as my forearm. The stride length was crazy too. I had to half jog to match it. Each step was easily 4-5 feet apart. The impressions were inches deep in places. Whatever made them was heavy. I crouched down and laid my hand next to one. My palm fit neatly inside the ball of the foot impression. My fingers didn't reach the toes. The rational part of my brain checked out right there. I'd seen Bigfoot shows before. Cryptid documentaries that play at 3 in the morning when you can't sleep. I'd laughed at most of them. Grainy footage, dudes in camo whispering into night vision cameras. Now, I was staring at the kind of track those guys would sell their souls to film. Okay, I said out loud, just to hear my own voice and prove I still existed. Okay, big guy, you made your point. I followed the tracks for maybe 100 yards before they vanished into a rocky section near a ravine. The smell lingered in the air, faint but still wrong. My skin crawled. Every survival instinct screamed, go back, pack up, leave, now. What I actually did? I stayed, because I'm stubborn, and because at that point I still thought I understood the rules. Big animals, even weird ones, are still animals. You keep your distance, don't corner them, don't surprise them, and you're usually fine. Usually. I spent the rest of that day close to camp, chopping extra wood, keeping the fire big, making more noise than necessary. I talked to myself, to the trees, to whatever was out there, like an idiot trying to negotiate with a thunderstorm. The forest listened and waited. That night, the rain came back harder, thick cold lines slashing through the beam of my headlamp. I banged the fire, zipped myself into my tent, shotgun within arm's reach. I must have dozed because the next thing I remember is waking up perfectly alert. No grogginess, no shifting from one sleep level to another. Just instantly awake, heart already beating too fast, like someone had flipped a switch. The forest was dead quiet. Then I heard breathing. Not the soft sounds from the night before. This was louder, ragged, coming from just beyond the tent wall at my feet. Then, slowly, that breathing shifted around to the side, then the head of the tent. Something large was crouched there. I could see its shadow as a darker shape against the fabric when the fire popped, sending tiny flares of light. Broad shoulders, massive head. It blocked out a good chunk of the tent wall. A low murmur drifted in, like speech, but not in any language I know. People call it samurai chatter when they talk about Bigfoot vocalizations. That's exactly what it sounded like. Deep, rapid, garbled syllables, like a baritone voice playing in reverse. It scraped something across the nylon then. Just a single slow drag of what sounded like nails, testing, feeling the barrier. Every primitive part of me screamed, "Do not move, do not shoot, do not make eye contact." But another part, a more rational, desperate one, whispered, "If it decides to come in, you're dead anyway. Do something." So I did the only thing that felt like it wouldn't trigger an immediate charge. I spoke. My voice shook. "I'm leaving in the morning. I don't want trouble." The chatter stopped. The breathing paused. For 3 long seconds, there was nothing. Not rain, not wind, not breath. Then the thing exhaled, a rough, rumbling gust. And I swear, I felt my chest vibrate with it through the ground. It made a deep, almost questioning sound, like a weird hum. Another 2 knocks echoed from further out in the trees, answering knocks. And then it stood up. The tent wall rose with it. The silhouette went from squat to towering, 8, 9 feet, easy, even accounting for distortions. The head was more conical than I expected, like the crown came to a gentle peak. Broad shoulders, long arms hanging almost to its knees. It moved away, each step thudding softly through the wet soil. I didn't sleep again at all that night. I left at the first light, or I tried to. The smartest thing I did that morning was not even bothering with breakfast. I broke camp fast, stuffed a cold, wet tent into my pack, took down the bear bag, and headed back toward where I thought the trail was. The rain turned from drizzle to downpour in minutes. Visibility dropped to maybe 50 feet. The forest, already dense, blurred into a gray-brown wall. There's this thing that happens when you're off trail in unfamiliar terrain in bad weather. You think you're going straight, but you're not. Tiny detours around fallen logs, slight deviations around rocks, avoiding areas where the mud looks too deep. It all adds up. After an hour, I realized I had no idea where the original trail was anymore. My GPS naturally, decided now was a great time to die. Condensation had gotten into the unit. The screen glitched, flickered, then went black. I checked my compass, corrected course, and kept moving. The rain soaked me through every layer. My boots squelched with every step. The cold started to settle into my joints. That's when the forest started hurting me. I didn't realize it at first. I'd move in one direction and run into deadfall so thick I'd have to detour. Then I'd hit a steep hillside, too slick to safely climb. Then thick, tangled brush, so dense it might as well have been a wall. Every route I took eventually angled me toward the same place, the sound of rushing water. It came out at the edge of a ravine, maybe 30 feet across, 20 feet down, with a foaming creek slamming through the middle. The rocks were slick, dark, and irregular. There were enough downed logs that, in theory, you could cross if you were desperate and had good balance. I was desperate. I scanned for a better way, but the ravine stretched out in both directions, disappearing into fog. I didn't have the energy for a long detour. My left calf was starting to cramp from the cold. As I stood there, catching my breath, that smell hit me again. Stronger now. Wet dog, rot, and something sour underneath it. My skin went cold even under my soaked jacket. The forest behind me was quiet. Too quiet. I hadn't heard a bird the entire hike back. No squirrels, no nothing. Just behind me, a branch creaked. Not in the wind. There was almost no wind down in that gully. This was the sound of weight. I turned slowly. At first, I couldn't see it. Just trees, brush, gray rain. Then one of the trees moved. It stepped out from behind the pine, 20 yards away. I finally saw its face. I knew what it was the second I saw it, even though every rational part of my brain screamed that this could not be real. It was exactly what all those crazy people on late night TV described. Huge, 8, maybe 9 feet tall, though hunched forward slightly, covered in dark brown hair, matted with rain, hanging in clumps off its shoulders and arms. The chest was massive and barrel-like, thick with muscle under the hair. The arms were long enough that the fingertips nearly brushed its knees. But it was the face that locked me in place. Not ape, not human, but somewhere in the awful valley between. The brow was heavy and sloped, shadowing deep-set eyes that glowed a muted amber in the diffused light. The nose was broad and flat, more human than a gorilla's. The mouth was wide, lips dark and too thin, framed by short, shaggy hair that looked almost like a beard. It looked at me with the kind of intelligence you usually only see in people. Not animal curiosity, not fear, appraisal. A low rumble vibrated in its chest. Its lips pulled back and I saw teeth, more human than fangs but bigger, thicker, stained. The canines were longer, not wolf long but enough to ruin your day. We just stared at each other. I didn't raise the shotgun. Instinct screamed that would be taken as a challenge, and I had no illusions about how fast it could close 20 yards. "Easy," I said, my voice shaking. "I'm leaving. I'm going home." Another figure shifted in the trees behind it. Taller, darker. A second one. This one kept further back, half hidden, just a suggestion of mass and eyes in the gloom. I realized, with a crawling horror, that I had never been dealing with a single creature. The wood knocks, the call and response, the moving around the tent. There was always more than one. The one in front took a step closer. It didn't move like a person. Its gait was smooth, almost gliding, the weight shifting like a predator. It huffed again, scenting the air. I tried to step back, but my heel found the ravine edge. Rocks crumbled, slid into emptiness. The sound of the creek below became louder, closer. Trapped. The Bigfoot's eyes flicked down to my feet, then to the ravine, then back up. I swear to you, it understood the position I was in. There was something like decision in that gaze. It barked, a short, explosive sound, somewhere between a shout and a roar. The world went white. The next part is broken, shattered. You know how a mirror looks after someone punches it. All fractured shards where you only see little pieces of reflection. That's my memory from then until the day they found me. I remember this. That roar wasn't just sound. It felt like it hit my chest, my skull, my spine. My vision went fuzzy at the edges. My knees buckled. I dropped to one hand, shotgun slipping from my grasp. The Bigfoot moved. 1 second it was 20 yards away, the next it was right there, looming, its smell choking me. A hand, you can't call it a paw. It was a hand, closed on the front of my jacket. The fingers wrapped almost all the way around my chest. The strength in that grip made every gym PR I'd ever hit feel laughable. It lifted. For a second, I hung over the ravine, boots dangling, the creek roaring below. My brain had enough time to blare one clear thought. It's going to drop me. It wants it to look like an accident. Then it pulled me back. The last clear image I have from that moment is its face, inches from mine, rain dripping off its brow, eyes boring into me like it was memorizing my features. Then the world snapped. There are flashes after that. A cave, dim, foul-smelling, with walls damp and streaked with mineral deposits. Firelight flickering further back. The sound of water dripping. Something heavy breathing in the darkness. My hands bound with something fibrous. Roots? Strips of bark? I remember trying to move my fingers and feeling numbness tingling up my arms. I remember multiple shapes in the gloom. Tall and broad. Low, murmuring chatter, back and forth, like an argument. Bones in a pile, small ones. Not all animal. Another flash. Being carried, my body slung over a shoulder. The rhythm of long strides, the sway of branches above, cold air on my face. Dozens of eyes shining in the dark forest around us, animals watching but not making a sound. Rain, always rain, then nothing, just black. No dreams, no sense of time, no internal narration, like I'd been turned off. You know how long I was gone? 5 months. I know because they told me in the hospital when I was coherent enough to ask. As far as I was concerned, I left California in late September, went camping, had a few bad nights, and then woke up on a stretcher, staring at a gray sky and faces in orange jackets. It was February. A pair of hunters found me stumbling near a service road, 30 miles from where I'd started my hike. I was barefoot, wearing clothes 2 sizes too big. They weren't mine, and wrapped in some kind of old, filthy army blanket. I was 30 pounds lighter. My beard had grown out, tangled and matted. I had scars on my wrists and ankles, like I'd been bound for a long time. My left ribs showed signs of healed fractures. I remember the ride in the ambulance, in snapshots. Oxygen mask on my face, someone shouting vitals, the world flashing by in smeared streaks of grey. The first clear memory after the ravine is waking up in a hospital bed in Jackson, fluorescent lights humming overhead, IV line in my arm, a nurse staring at me like she wasn't sure I was going to stay awake. My voice came out like sandpaper. What day is it? February 16th, she said gently. You've been through a lot, Mr. Winchester. I tried to sit up. My body felt like it belonged to someone else. Weak, uncoordinated, sore in ways I didn't have words for. That's not possible. I was just... I trailed off. My brain still scrambled, tried to fill in the blanks. Just what? Hiking? Camping? Running? The memories from the trip up the ravine were bright, sharp. After that, it was like someone had wiped the film. A doctor came in later, middle-aged guy, calm, practiced voice. He told me my ID has been flagged as a missing person. My rental car had been found at the trailhead months earlier, half buried in snow. There had been searches at the time, dogs, helicopters, volunteers, but heavy early snow and rough terrain had shut most of it down. You were presumed deceased, he said, not unkindly, until those hunters found you. He asked what I remembered. I told him about the trip in, the tents, the rain. I did not tell him about 18-inch tracks and wood knocks and faces in the dark. I told him I must have slipped, hit my head, gotten lost. Classic safe story. He nodded, like he'd heard it 1,000 times. Given the circumstances, we suspect dissociative amnesia triggered by trauma and prolonged exposure, he said. It's not uncommon in missing hiker cases. The brain sometimes protects itself by editing. Yeah, editing. That's one way to put it. They released me after 2 weeks, once I could walk without wobbling and keep foot down. I went back to San Francisco, back to my small apartment, back to a life that had already begun rearranging itself around the assumption that I was dead. I should have been relieved. Instead, I felt like I'd been dropped into someone else's body, in someone else's timeline. The nightmare started almost immediately. Always the same pieces, just shuffled around. A dark cave, the sound of dripping water, firelight illuminating rough walls, huge silhouettes moving just beyond the glow. A hand, massive and rough, pressing on my chest, pinning me. A voice, not human, not entirely, murmuring in that garbled samurai chatter, so close I could feel breath on my face. Sometimes I dream of being back on the edge of the ravine, the creature holding me over the drop. Except, in the dream, it did let go. I'd fall, the creek rushing up, and somewhere between the rock and the water, I'd wake up with my heart hammering so hard I thought it would punch through my ribs. I started living like a ghost, stopped going to the gym, couldn't stand the sound of weights slamming, the grunts of people pushing themselves. It all reminded me too much of struggling against something vastly stronger than me and losing. For a while, I convinced myself that the Bigfoot part of my memory was just my brain trying to make sense of trauma. I'd had an accident, gotten lost, maybe run into a bear. My mind, helpful little liar that it is, had dressed it up in monster clothes. Then, one night, about 6 months after I got back, I woke up from another nightmare with one particular image burned into my head. A rock wall with a set of deep, parallel grooves scratched into it. 4 of them, each about as far apart as my fingers, running straight down the stone. At the bottom of each groove, dried, dark stains. Blood. I couldn't shake it, it felt real. So I did the thing you're not supposed to do when your life has been touched by something inexplicable. I started researching. Ask anyone who's been down this rabbit hole. Once you start looking into Bigfoot, you realize you're late to a very crowded, very weird party. Missing hiker clusters, wood knocks, howls in the night, rock throwing, tree structures, cave systems, stories that sound stupid until you live something like them. I found reports from Wyoming, especially in and around the Wind River Range and Bridgerton. Hunters hearing knocks and whoops, campers having rocks thrown at their tents, outfitter guides refusing to go back to certain drainages after something screamed at them from the timberline. On an obscure forum, buried in a thread from years ago, I found a story from a guy who claimed to have seen 3 hairy giants moving along a ravine, carrying something over their shoulders. He described the smell, the chatter, the way the forest went dead silent. He also mentioned a specific rock formation, a crooked, hook-like overhang near a narrow crossing where people sometimes tried to jump instead of detour. The description made my skin crawl. It matched the ravine where I'd seen the first Bigfoot almost perfectly. I started sketching things from my nightmares. The cave, the grooves in the rock wall, the way the light hit some kind of low, crude fire pit. Then, one night, staring at the sketch of those wall grooves, something in my brain clicked. I remembered pulling against bindings until my wrists bled, the roughness of bark cutting into my skin, the helplessness, animal panic of knowing I couldn't move, couldn't run, couldn't fight, while something watched me from the dark. I remembered trying to stand and being shoved back down by a hand on my chest, the furious boom of a roar in my face, the taste of dirt and iron. Those grooves on the cave wall, they were mine. My fingers, my blood. The realization hit like a physical blow. I dropped the pen I was holding. My whole body started shaking. They hadn't found me by accident. I had escaped somehow. And if that was true, then everything else, everything my rational mind had been desperately trying to rebrand as hallucination, was probably true too. That's when the idea took hold. The worst idea I've ever had. Go back. Look, I know how it sounds. I'd call it stupid too, if it was someone else. But it wasn't curiosity. Not really. It was infection. Once that need to know set in, it spread through everything. I couldn't work, couldn't sleep. I kept thinking, if I don't face this, it's going to own me forever. Every shadow, every creek, every forest will become a threat. So I made a deal with myself. I wouldn't go back alone. I called 2 guys from the crews I'd worked with. You know the type, strong, practical, not easily rattled. One of them, Mike, had done some elk hunting out west. The other, Daryl, was ex-military. I didn't tell them, hey, I think Bigfoot kidnapped me. I told them I wanted to go back to the area I got lost in, see if I could piece together what happened. I did mention the weird noises and strange tracks. I wanted them on edge, just not running. They agreed. Men are idiots sometimes. We flew out in late October, autumn again, because I'm apparently a fan of repeating bad decisions with seasonal accuracy. We rented another 4x4, packed better this time, multiple GPS units, extra batteries, radios, bear spray, 2 rifles, my shotgun, and more food than we'd need for a week. When we checked in with the ranger station, the guy behind the desk looked at my ID for a long second. Recognition flickered across his face. I remember your name, he said. You were the one they found after the early snow a couple years back. Yeah, I said, keeping my voice steady, trying to make peace with the place. He nodded slowly. Stay away from the ravines when it rains, he said. We lose people that way more than any other. Nice, comforting send-off. We drove to the same general area, then hiked in. I led, using that fuzzy, half-recalled map my brain had pieced together from flashes and nightmares. The forest looked different without the constant rain, more open, less oppressive, but certain landmarks hit me like punches to the ribs. The twisted tree, the clearing where I'd first camped, the route down toward the ravine. As we moved, I caught myself unconsciously listening for wood knocks. Every dry branch snapping underfoot made my heart spike. We reached the ravine by late afternoon. It looked shallower than I remembered, maybe because the water level was lower. The hook-shaped rock overhang was exactly where that forum post said it would be. Standing there, Looking across at the opposite bank, I felt this odd sensation, like my vision was trying to split. Part of me saw it as it was, damp but passable. Another part layered in how it looked that day, slick, foggy, with a giant figure stepping out from the trees. "You okay, man?" Mike asked. "Yeah," I lied. We followed the ravine down, I think. I think that's where I went, where they found me, downstream somewhere. We hiked along the edge, careful of footing. Daryl marked our route occasionally with bright tape. The sky was overcast, that thin, even gray light that makes time feel vague. About a mile down, we found the first sign. A tree about 10 inches in diameter had been snapped off at 8 feet. Not cut, snapped. The top lay on the ground nearby, branches stripped. Daryl whistled low. "Wind do that?" "Maybe," I said, or something big leaned on it. We found more as we went. A few rocks stacked in strange little cairns, well off any obvious human path. Sticks jammed into the ground in pairs. Faint impressions near muddy patches that might have been tracks, but broken enough we couldn't be sure. Then we smelled it. That same musky, rotten, sour stench. Mike stopped dead. Jesus, what died out here? My skin prickled. "You smell that in bear country sometimes," I said. "But just stay sharp, yeah?" We made camp that evening in a relatively open flat spot away from the ravine edge. We built a fire bigger than necessary. No one complained. I didn't suggest any of us sleep alone. We parked all 3 tents close, doors facing inward towards the fire. Daryl cleaned his rifle, the movements automatic. Mike carved at a piece of wood with his knife, more fidget than craft. At some point, inevitably, we started talking about Bigfoot. Mike laughed it off. "If it's real, it's just some undiscovered gray tape, right? Smart, sure, but still an animal. We've all seen weird stuff in the woods." Daryl was quieter. He sipped from his flask and stared into the flames. "In Afghanistan," he said slowly, "there were nights the local guys would refuse to go out. Not because of us, not because of the other side, because of things in the hills. You start hearing enough stories, you stop laughing quite so hard." They finally asked me what I remembered. I told them more this time, about the tent, the wood knocks, the whoops, about the tracks, about the thing's face by the ravine. I didn't talk about the cave yet. That felt too close. The forest listened. Somewhere out in the dark, a single knock rang out. We all froze. Another knock answered it from further away. Mike's laugh came out thin. "Woodpeckers?" "In the dark?" Daryl asked. The knocks stopped. Then low and far off, a whoop rose, warbling in the night air. "Okay," Mike said quietly. "That's not a bird." We slept in shifts, or at least we tried. Sometime around 2 or 3 in the morning, hard to say exactly, I took my turn outside the tent. The fire had burned down to coals. The sky had that faint pre-dawn lightning, A thin mist was creeping up from the ravine. The forest felt poised, like it was holding its breath. I walked a few yards away to take a leak, shotgun slung over my shoulder, every step careful. That's when I saw it. A patch of rock, half hidden by brush, with a narrow gap between two boulders. The gap wasn't large, maybe shoulder width, but beyond it, I could see dim darkness that didn't match the outside night. A cavity, an opening. Something in my chest clenched. I knew that entrance, not from when I was awake, from my nightmares. Guys, I called, voice low but urgent. You need to see this. They stumbled out, sleepy but alert, the second they saw my face. We approached the gap together. Up close, the smell rolled out, damp stone, old smoke, and that musky rot. My stomach flipped. Daryl clicked on his flashlight, beam slicing into the darkness. The tunnel sloped gently down into a wider chamber. The walls were rough, streaked with mineral stains. The ceiling was higher than I expected, 10-12 feet in places. Bones littered one side, mostly animal by the look of it. Deer, elk, smaller mammals. But here and there, shapes that could have been something else. Mike swore softly. Nope, 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 nope. Hold up, I said, throat tight. Just to the wall, then we back out. My feet moved on their own. I walked down the slope, light dancing over rock and shadow, until I reached the spot from my dreams. There they were, 4 deep grooves in the wall, running vertically, each about as far apart as my fingers. At the bottom, darker stains soaked into the stone. I reached out and pressed my fingertips into them. They fit. The world tilted. A sound rang in my head like distant roaring. Another flash of memory hit me. I'm tied to something, maybe a post, maybe a stalagmite. My arms are stretched above my head. Every muscle burns. I'm screaming soundlessly as I pull, fingers clawing at the rock, nails tearing, skin splitting. A massive shape looms in the doorway, watching, judging. The smell of blood and smoke fills the air. I jerked my hand back like the stone burned. I was here, I said, voice cracking. This is where I was. Mike's face had gone pale. We should get out, now. Behind us, outside, somewhere in the trees, something knocked. Not a single knock this time. 3, close, hard, like a warning. Daryl's jaw tightened. Agree with him. We've seen enough. We turned to leave. That's when the attack started. The moment we stepped out of the cave, the forest erupted. Stones flew first, fist-sized rocks whistling through the air, slamming into trees, skidding near our feet. One bounced off Daryl's shoulder, spinning him halfway around with a shout. Whoops and guttural calls echoed from multiple directions, overlapping, rising and falling in an awful chorus. The smell hit like a wall. I caught a glimpse of movement between the trees, something huge, darting from trunk to trunk with impossible speed for something that size. They are circling us, Mike yelled, bringing his rifle up. Don't shoot unless they close, I shouted back. We don't know how many. A rock slammed into my chest, knocking the breath out of me. I stumbled, nearly dropped the shotgun. Then one of them charged. It came from our left, a massive blur of dark fur and muscle, breaking from cover with a roar that made the ground vibrate. It moved on two legs, but hunched forward, arms swinging. Each stride ate distance like nothing I've ever seen. Back to the ravine edge, Daryl snapped, switching instantly into that clipped tone soldiers get in bad situations. We keep them on one side. We fell back toward the open area near the ravine, trying not to trip on roots and rocks. The charging creature veered clearly, angling to cut us off. Up close, it was even worse than I remembered. The face twisted in something like rage, lips peeled back to show those thick, nasty teeth. Its eyes burned amber in the dull light. Mike fired. The rifle cracked, impossible loud. The round hit the creature high in the shoulder. I saw fur and something dark burst out. It stumbled, roared louder, staggered sideways into a tree hard enough to shake branches loose. For half a breath, hope flared. Then it straightened. It slapped a massive hand over the wound, growled something guttural, and stepped forward again. "Are you kidding me?" Mike shouted. "Second one," Daryl barked. Another shape emerged on our right, keeping more distance, moving more cautiously. I realized there were at least three, maybe more, staying back in the timber. "We can't win this," I yelled. "We need to break contact." "Ravine," Daryl repeated. "We can't let them surround." The first creature lunged. It covered the last few yards in a single, horrifying bound, hand swinging out. The impact caught Mike in the side, sending him flying. He hit the ground and rolled, groaning, rifle skidding away. I didn't think. I moved. All those hours in the gym, every deadlift, every swing of an axe, every log I'd carried, my body went on autopilot. I stepped in, between the creature and Mike, and swung the shotgun like a bat, buttstock first, aiming at its face. The stock connected with a fleshy thud against its cheekbone. The force would have dropped a man. The Bigfoot's head snapped sideways. It blinked, slowly turned back to look at me. Up close, its eyes were not animal eyes. There was hate there, and something like disappointment. It grabbed the barrel of the shotgun, just took it from me like I was a kid with a toy. Its fingers crushed the metal with a squeal and snap, like it was made of cheap foil. It tossed the ruined weapon aside. I took a step back, heart trying to break free from my chest. "Bear spray," Daryl shouted. He stepped in from the side, canister in hand, and unleashed a bright orange plume straight into the creature's face. Even if it wasn't a bear, capsaicin is still capsaicin. The creature screamed. There is no other word for it. It clapped both hands to its face, stumbling back, roaring and coughing. The sound was so loud it rattled my teeth. The other shapes in the trees howled in response. "Run," Daryl snapped. "Go, go, go." We didn't argue. We grabbed Mike, half dragging him. He'd taken a nasty hit to the ribs, but adrenaline had him moving. We sprinted along the ravine edge, hearts hammering, lungs burning. Behind us, wood splintered, footsteps pounded. Another rock whistled past my ear. The forest became a blur of trunks and branches. I lost my hat, maybe some skin off my cheek. Didn't care. We just ran. At some point, the trees thinned. The ground leveled out a bit. I saw a break in the tree line ahead, a faint suggestion of the service road. Almost there, I gasped. A shape burst from the timber to our right, cutting us off. Another Bigfoot. This one slightly smaller, with reddish fur, streaked with grey. It slid to a stop between us and the road, chest heaving, teeth bared. We skidded, nearly colliding with each other. Daryl lifted his rifle. The creature roared, throwing its arms wide. He took a step forward, another, each one deliberate, not rushing this time, confident, like it knew we were trapped. I'm not proud of what I felt in that moment. Not courage, not resolve, just cold animal terror, and the realization that I had dragged two men who trusted me into something far beyond what we could handle. The creature huffed, deep in its chest. Something like recognition flickered in its eyes when it looked at me. A tilt of the head, a low, almost questioning sound. It remembered me. In that instant, another flash hit me. The cave, firelight, me lying on the ground, barely able to move. This same reddish-furred creature standing over me, studying me, then rumbling something to the others, a hand reaching down, gripping my arm, holding me up, carrying me out. Why? We'll never know. Back in the present, he took another step toward us. I did the only thing I could think of. I picked up a fist-sized rock and hurled it as hard as I could at its face. It batted the rock away with contemptuous ease. But in that tiny opening, Daryl moved. He fired, not at the creature's chest or head, but at the ground near its feet. The dirt exploded, rocks and debris flying up. The Bigfoot flinched, more from surprise than actual damage. We sprinted around it, exploiting that half second of hesitation, and broke through the last line of trees. The service road appeared under our boots like a miracle. Gravel, mud, ruts. The 4x4 was visible further down, a dark, blessed shape. Behind us, the forest line seated. Shadows shifted, shapes moved. But they didn't cross. They prowled just inside the tree line, pacing, snarling, watching. I stole one last glance back as we piled into the truck. The reddish one stood at the edge, partially visible. It met my eyes. There was something there I still don't have a word for. Anger, definitely. Possessiveness, and maybe an accusation. We tore out of there, tires slipping, mud spraying. No one spoke until we hit pavement. Even then, for a while, the only sound in the cab was our breathing. We checked back in with the ranger station, gave a sanitized version of events. Big animals acting aggressively, that sort of thing. We mentioned the cave but left out the bones and the grooves and the feeling of being evaluated by something that could snap you in half like a twig. The ranger listened, face unreadable, then nodded slowly. Sometimes the animals get territorial, he said, especially in bad weather years. Best to stay clear of certain areas. He didn't ask many follow-up questions, almost like he'd heard something similar before. Mike had bruised ribs and a mild concussion. Daryl had a nasty cut on his forehead from a flying rock. a scar he'll carry for life. I had some cracked ribs, a mess of scrapes, and a head full of memories that don't fit any sane reality. On the flight home, none of us mentioned the word Bigfoot. Back in San Francisco, we drifted apart, not out of anger, out of instinct. Shared trauma has a way of making people avoid each other, because seeing them means remembering. I, meanwhile, had my answer. I hadn't hallucinated. I hadn't imagined. Those months of missing time belonged to something real. Something that walks upright, lives in family groups or clans, uses caves, communicates with knocks and whoops, and strange, garbled speech. Something strong enough to twist trees and snap metal, and carry a grown man for miles like a sack of laundry. Something that can decide whether you live or die. So that's it. That's why I don't go camping anymore. Why I jump at knocks and hate the sound of distant howls on nature documentaries. Why I avoid the freeway sections some days because the grunts and roars from people hitting PRs sound a little too close to something I've heard in the dark. You asked why I came back different. Because I was taken. Because something that shouldn't exist had its hands on me, decided I was useful or interesting or I don't know, and then either changed its mind or got outvoted. Because I went back to prove to myself that I wasn't crazy, and instead confirmed the worst version of my memories. The hardest part to live with isn't the fear, it's the knowing. Knowing that those monster stories aren't just campfire jokes. Knowing that deep in those forests there are eyes watching hikers, hunters, lumber crews. We're not at the top of the food chain everywhere we think we are. And knowing that whatever those things are, they let me go. Twice. People vanish in the woods all the time. Some turn up, some don't. We like to blame cliffs, rivers, hypothermia, regular predators. Sometimes, sure, nature is dangerous enough without adding monsters to it. But I've seen the monsters. I remember the cave, the grooves in the rock, the roar right in my face, the way those eyes looked through me, not at me. So when some poor bastard's photo pops up on the news, local man missing on solo hiking trip in remote area, I don't just think about exposure and cougars and getting lost. I think about wood knocks echoing through damn trees. I think about whoops in the night. I think about massive shapes pacing just beyond the firelight. And somewhere out there, in Wyoming, I think there's a reddish-furred giant with a scar on its shoulder who would recognize me if it saw me again. So yeah, that's why I'm done with camping. And why, if you ever ask me to go on a fun little autumn trip out into the woods with you, the answer is going to be hell no. You wanted the truth, man. There it is. Do with it what you want. Just, if you hear 3 knocks in the forest and then the whole world goes quiet, leave. Don't wait around to see whose hand is making the sound.